Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, I destroyed a brewery. After that, friend prank called me at my job, so I had him served with a fake paternity suit at his. Finally, revenge on the teacher who made me run an extra lap of the oval. Before we get into this episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss another of our videos. I destroyed a brewery. Nearly 20 years ago, I was a brewer at a brew pub. The owner was a complete lunatic and an utter a-hole. Before I was hired, he had already purchased the brewery equipment, used, from a closed microbrewery. Problem is, it was literally 4 times larger than it needed to be for the size of the place, and to top it off he was selling Big 3 beers too. And it was a Pugsley system, brewers will know. But I made it work, even got the stupid ring-walled yeast to behave. But I only need to brew about 3 or 4 times a month. I have worked at places we brewed that much a week, so I wasn't needed anywhere near 40 hours a week. And I was salaried. So he decided I needed to work night manager at least 2 nights a week, to fill out my hours. That was fine, it was an easy gig. After our first year, he advertised a huge anniversary event, with specials on food and drink. Food specials. Commercial beer specials. And didn't even mention that we made our own. Much less put anything on special. Idiot. Not too long after, I got my first vacation in over a year. And he was mad at me for insisting. But life was stressful, not least of which because my mom was in hospice, stage 4 cancer. But her condition was such that she said my wife and I should go, she'll be fine. So we went camping for a week. The day before our trip was to end, we got word she had died. 2 days earlier. My family didn't know how to reach us, only she did. We rushed home, 6-hour drive, and on the way I called my boss and told him what had happened, and that I probably would not be in on Monday as planned. This was Saturday. I found out later from a bartender that he then bitched at the chef that I was probably going to want more time off. I did in fact take Monday off, but I went in on Tuesday to do my night manager shift. Now, my mom's wishes were to be cremated, with no embalming, so by the time I got home, she was already cremated. So the memorial service was planned for 2 weeks later, right before Labor Day weekend. There was to be a memorial service Thursday, and the interment for the family Friday. So I planned and made sure that the servers were full and I wouldn't need to brew for at least a week. That Wednesday the boss comes and tells me he wants me to work night shift on Thursday and Friday. Normally I did Tuesday and Wednesday nights, to make up for the time off I'd taken to help my dad out. He wasn't handling it well. He wanted me to come in after my mom's funeral. I flatly refused, at which point he said fine, but I'd have to work a double shift Saturday then. I nearly lost it. I walked away, and after I cooled off I went back and told him I was no longer going to do the manager shifts, and that I wanted to switch to hourly for brewery work only. He was angry, but stuck. He needed me in the brewery. Things started calming down, but after a few weeks I noticed my paychecks were for less than I anticipated. I hadn't been tracking my clock in clock out very closely, because prior to this I only clocked in and out so I was logged in to do manager functions, but I happened to have a couple of slips in my wallet, and because I still had manager access, discovered he had been altering my hours, eventually cheating me out of around 20 hours in just 6 weeks. And that's when I hatched my plan. I was done with this a-hole. Remember that ringwood yeast? Well, in a brewery, you harvest yeast from a fermenting batch to use to brew a later one. And since we were slow, it often had to be stored for a while before it got used. But you had to use it within 30 days, 21 is better, or it goes sour and starts dying. Normally I would take other steps to ensure it stayed clean and healthy, but not on the last batch I harvested. It just went into the cold room. And stayed there. I stopped going in very often, just logging tank levels to make sure nothing ran out and made him suspicious. I would even go in to make sure he wasn't in that day, and later message him that I'd brewed, I hadn't, and waited. On day 45, after I got the check for the last hours I worked, I overnighted my keys in with a resignation letter. He called me the next day, screaming. I told him I knew what he'd done, and I wouldn't be back. I don't know what he looked like when he went into the brewery cellar and discovered he had empty fermenters, nearly empty serving tanks, dead yeast, and almost no grain. Pity really. After that, he tried to hire my former assistant, who was working at another brew pub by then because the a-hole had forced me to fire him to save money. He laughed at him. He then apparently got the underage son of one of the brewers at a nearby brewpub which he had originally been part of to brew for him, but had to fire him because the kid kept getting caught drunk down in the cellar. So he tried doing it, and I had heard they stopped brewing entirely eventually. About a year after I left, he folded. Staff showed up one morning to padlock doors. Drove through there a few years back, not only gone but building was torn down. I felt like stopping to sow the ground with salt, but I was in a hurry. Stopping to sow the ground. Friend Crank called me at my job, so I had him served with a fake paternity suit at his. 10 years ago a friend of mine Crank called me several times in my office over the course of a day. I decided in that moment that 1, this would not stand, and 2, rather than entering into a long, protracted quagmire of a prank war, I would use the nuclear option and end it immediately. My friend Mike was a well-known local bartender. I worked at the same bar as a bouncer, and he was very much enjoying single life at the time, facts which I knew I could take advantage of. Soon a plan began to form. I would have him served with a fake paternity suit while he was working at the bar. So, I compiled a ton of free online legal documents not just for the paternity suit but also income disclosure forms, statements of parental rights, and suggested visitation schedules pending demonstrable proof of sobriety. I filled out all the forms, then smeared what looked like date-received stamps as proof they had been filed and ran copies to make those stamps even more illegible. From there, I crafted a backstory to be included in a cover letter from the fictional mother's fake law firm, the nearby city Family Law Center, on letterhead and all. The mother was an Irish exchange student visiting the area the previous summer. She had only been with Mike, so she knew the baby, Eliza, was his. The cover letter encouraged Mike to call during regular office hours to discuss arranging a DNA test to affirm paternity. I set up a generic voicemail for the number listed as the office on the letterhead. By the end, the paperwork was somewhere between 20 to 25 pages. I enlisted another friend not known by Mike to serve the documents and instructed him to do so around 10 p.m. on a Saturday evening. I told him to keep the interaction very simple. I wasn't able to be by the back bar because I knew I would be laughing too hard, but based on eyewitness reports it played out like this. Friend, are you Mike, last name? Mike, yes. Friend, Michael, middle name, last name? Mike, yes. Friend, drops folder on bar. Mike, what's that? Friend, paternity suit. You've been served, turns around and immediately walks out of the bar. Mike, yeah, that sounds about right. Mike read through the packet, shakily poured himself several drinks, and then ran over to the bar owner, who was aware of the prank, to ask what to do. He also called the number on the letterhead but sadly did not leave a voicemail. After a solid 10 minutes of intense psychological revenge, the owner finally told Mike he should closely read the last page of the packet. On it, in size 2 font it read, "Go fuck yourself, Mike." At which point, Mike ran to the front door and punched me in the chest. Epilogue: several months later, Mike was on a trip across the country. He had left his car at home with his mom, who generously had it washed for him. Mike for some reason kept the paternity suit paperwork in his driver's side door. During the course of the car wash, his mother found it and read the entire thing, then called him sobbing in the middle of the night asking why he hadn't told her about her bastard Irish granddaughter. Revenge on the teacher who made me run an extra lap of the oval. I woke up feeling sick. I couldn't stomach breakfast but I still had to go to school. In my home, if you weren't throwing up, you were well enough for school. I told Mum that I didn't think I could run or do any sports activities, I felt so unwell. She told me I could skip PE. I needed a note to be excused. Instead she told me to tell the teacher that my mum gave me permission to miss PE school. I walked to school slowly, I sat at my desk tenderly, and I tried not to think about my tummy hurting. The bell rang and our sports teacher arrived at our classroom to announce that today we'd be practicing for the annual long-distance race. Fantastic, we'd be running. As we got up to head to the school oval, I went up to Mr. Gray and told him I was excused from sports today. He wasn't having it. No note, no excuse. I was going to have to run. I wasn't even pissed. I feel so unwell I just went with it. At the oval we were told to do a warm-up lap and then do some stretches. Mr. Gray stressed the point that everyone was to run the whole way. Around halfway round, I was struggling. I walked the last 100 meters, holding my tummy. What an asshole Mr. Gray was. He waited until I was back with the group and yelled at me, an 8-year-old, for not running the whole way. My punishment was to run the oval again. the whole way, while everyone watched and jeered. I have to hand it to my classmates here, they didn't jeer me at all. The grounds were silent as I struggled to run the oval. I finished, breathing heavily, and I could feel a cold sweat all over. I walked straight up to a smug Mr. Gray and said, "Mr. Gray, I don't feel so good," and vomited all over his shoes, socks and legs. Chunks everywhere. I just remember all the kids jumping back out of the splatter zone, and of Mr. Gray looking horrified, staring at the mess on his legs and shoes. I smiled weakly and said, "I told you I shouldn't have run today." Weakly. And if you made it to the end, thanks for watching. Please remember to show your support and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.